Hello everyone, so this is our last video input session for our critical discourse analysis class, and for this particular research we'll be talking about doing CDA research. So we're going to be covering the following. So we'll talk about the different approaches of CDS and where Fairclough's work finds itself in that particular map or landscape of CDS studies. And then we'll go back and review the CDA workflow, and then we'll be discussing it with a little bit more detail this time, now that we already know the different strategies and components of CDA. And then we'll talk about developing research problems that are oriented to CDA research. And also this will guide you in terms of looking for appropriate and interesting research problems that you can sort of cling into for your final project. And then we'll talk about a little bit more comprehensively how to conduct and write CDA research to also guide you in terms of doing your own final papers and also writing the final report. The sources are from the works of Fairclough, Paltridge, and Wodak, and also previous published research that made use of Fairclough's CDA strategy. So in linguistics, in sociology, and the larger social sciences, there is really not just one approach of doing critical discourse research. And we can see it from this particular list. So it is really based on which approach makes most sense in your particular set of data that you're looking at, and of course your particular goal or objective for your research, or also whether you are more inclined to do it more in a linguistic sense, or you want to look into more social institutions, like for sociology, for instance. So there are different approaches. What we did focus on for the whole of our sessions is Fairclough's dialectical relational CDA. So as we note, and going back to the introduction, Fairclough CDA looks at how discourse articulates with social structures, practices, and power, how text is related to discursive practices, and how that discursive practices is related to larger sociocultural practices and ideologies. And it is really used for different things, particularly looking at policy texts, news and editorials, organizational documents, particularly policy documents or public domain documents. So basically it moves from textual analysis with discursive practice of how the ideologies are deployed, produced, consumed, and of course reflecting on how larger sociocultural structures or practices influence how these things go. So that's your dialectical relational CDA. So as we know, and we have discussed in our introduction, it's dialectical, meaning the text is influencing structure, and the structure is also influencing the social events which are found in the text. And that relational meaning, we're looking at how the relationalities between the text and also with the structures, and of course the people and the other agents that are engaged in said particular text. Right? So then this is what we're still going to be focusing on, but of course it is also important that you know where Fairclough CDA lies in the landscape of all critical discourse research. And you might notice that some of the people here are also being cited by Fairclough in their work. So, for example, Van Dyke talks about the social cognitive approach. So it focuses more on mental models, ideologies, and how they mediate between text and society. So it is used for political speeches, news discourse, and everyday talk about with an ideological state. So again, this is a part and parcel of what we do for Fairclough CDA, but this is more in terms of looking at mental models, kaya nga socio-cognitive. So that's the other approach. Next, we have the discourse historical approach by Wodak and Risage. So talks about intertextuality and interdiscursivity among time and genre. So yun nga yung historical strategies of nomination, predication, argumentation, and intensification and mitigation of certain discourses. So in short, may time element. So we're looking at how discourses change over time, and which is also very important. No, history is also part of social, social practices, right, or social cultural environment. And Wodak's research, looks into that. Excuse me. And so we usually use it for multi-genre and multi-period corpora. So for example, in a span of 6 years of a president, let's look at how the sonas have changed from year 1 to year 6. No? So really more of how time passes and what are the context in terms of that time passing and how discourses have been sort of engaged with in these particular speeches. And now we have the corpus-assisted discourse studies, or the CADS. So this one is really very much oriented with linguistic research, because what it does is that it gets a large corpora or a large set of text to track patterns like keywords or collocation. And so what it does is that it actually counts, no? So mayroong machine learning na ginagawa dito for your corpus-assisted discourse analysis. So think of this as something very close to language learning models and machine learning. So what it does is that it helps you sort of look at what are the common collocations or what words are usually put together. And so that gives you an idea of how discourse is being shaped. And usually we begin quantitatively, and then we have some form of qualitative interpretation, in terms of that. So CADS is really very linguistically oriented and also very much computer science oriented. There are softwares that sort of automate this process. So yun. Of course, we won't be able to do that because this is a full 3-unit course in linguistics. Next, we have multimodal discourse analysis. So what we do here is that aside from text, we also look at other modes or other media. So we look at how text, images, layout, typography, sound, gestures co-construct meaning with the language that we are looking at. So often we look at the work of Van Leeuwen, which also is someone who Fairclough cites so much in their work. So it's usually used for advertising, wherein of course we use a lot of modes in terms of sending our message. We have text, we have a poster, there's a picture there's a layout, the font that they use, the emojis that are being used, political campaign visuals, and platform interfaces. Like for example, how do you make most of the affordances of Facebook or YouTube, based, and how do you look at visuals and text, and how does the interaction of all this specific work do discourse work? How do they deploy those discourses and again connect with larger social cultural practices? But again, while this is something that Fairclough also I think is something that can be done in the dialectical and relational approach, since this is multi-modal, multi-methods, so we would need a little bit more theoretical frameworks. Like for example, if you're looking at visual data, you might need to look more on semiotics, which is again another field of philosophy and language studies. And then also you need to learn a lot about platform studies, and you might need to know about visual design, which again is another chunk of work. So while doing multimodal discourse analysis, it's very tempting to do it because again many of the texts that we engage in are not just text. They're embedded in layouts, they're embedded with pictures, they're embedded with a speaker who has a certain tone, who's certain using gestures, wearing something. Sometimes you have emojis, no, and it's really tempting to sort of put them together. But of course, there is some form of training and credentials that you have so that you can really engage out of them. So at the moment, we'll limit ourselves to text because that is what we sort of worked on and learned throughout the sessions. The next is critical metaphor and framing analysis, wherein we look at how certain text frame. So how do you frame or how do you metaphorize certain things? Which is again part of the larger umbrella of what we look at CDA of Fairclough. So what we sort of analyze here are speeches, op-eds, briefings, and pressers. So this one is really good, particularly when you look at political, journalistic data, those policy data or policy text. And then we have ethnographic or practice-oriented CDA, wherein we go a little bit more beyond the text. And so instead of speculating or analyzing its supposed effects, we go into the field and see how this discourse are really playing out in real life. How does the discourse deployed, let's say, by the policy, really influencing work relations within a particular community? So you go and do your field work or ethnography in a particular community or workplace and see how the discourse that you saw in the texts in the policies are really playing out behaviorally, socially in that particular institution. Again, very, very interesting, very tempting to do. But again, of course, you would need chops for ethnographic work, field work, which is again a whole set of competencies. And so we'll stick to texts for the meantime because that's the competency that we were able to build for this particular set of lectures that we've had so far. But of course, feel free to learn more so that you can also be able to engage in the other approaches of critical discourse studies. Again, we'll reframe back, or let's take a U-turn back to dialectical relational approach by Fairclough. That is how we're going to be looking at it. And of course, again, we will have to review or revisit Fairclough's 3 levels of analysis, right? So if you remember the 3 boxes, right? So you have your text, which is the linguistic features, and then you have your discursive practices that is correlating with or that is interacting with your text. So basically, discursive practices talks about production, consumption, and of course intertextuality and interdiscursivity. In short, what are the discourses being mixed, what are the discourses being competed or pitted against, and how is it being deployed through mixing of text, putting in other voices, using dialogicality, etc., etc. So you make use of the components and the strategies that we've learned throughout the term. And then, of course, your discursive practice is very much related to your sociocultural practice or social practice, which is the wider ideological organizational context wherein these discourses are being produced, deployed, verified, reproduced, and being naturalized in society. And how does the text sort of support these discourses, and how does that help in normalizing the sociocultural processes? So that is basically like the main meta paradigm we're going to latch onto when we do CDA based on Fairclough's work. And again, when you look at the different chapters of Fairclough, you see that we have 3. You have your text, you have your discourse, and then you have your social practice, but also in another sort of axis there, you have the 3 dimensions, which is the event or the genre. You have the discourse, which is the representation, what is being represented. And then you have the style or identity, which is the being, right? So just to review you, what do we look for the text? So 1, we look at lexical choices, vocabulary, wording. How do they evaluate no? What words do they use to evaluate that something is good, something is moral, something is bad, something is existing, right? What are the metaphors being deployed and how it is being framed, right? So again, if the metaphor, is it laden with value that is positive, negative, etc.? So that's what we look for in text. We also look at the grammar, like we look at transitivity. Who are the participants working? Who are the predicates? Who are the subjects? What are the different things that they're doing in that particular statement, and whether agency is allocated or invisibilized. And then of course we go back and talk about nominalization, meaning do we put agency on things and processes rather than people. So again, and passivization, wherein we hide agents so that it seems like things happen naturally when in fact there are agents to it. There are either whether they're malicious actors or they are elites. And then we also talk about modality, about how we feel or how do we evaluate, or the obligations or the non-obligations that we put in a particular activity, the assumptions and the presuppositions that are usually implied. And then so you can just go back to the book and also to our previous session so that you'll be able to remember what these are. We also look at cohesion and text structure. We look at thematic structures like the theme and the rhyme. So for example, ang theme is ano yung foreground, at ano yung bina-background, and then whether that yung for example, the parents donated money. So the theme here is the parents, and the one being backgrounded is the money. And then we now say the money is used to buy electric fans inside the classroom. So now the theme becomes the money. So in terms of, so you have to look at whether there is in a paragraph, in a composition of a paragraph, is there a particular theme that is already placed, even if ang dami nang nangyayari, nananatili pa rin na siya yung theme. And so ibig sabihin binibida siya, or yung isa ay pinapanatiling rhyme, or is it really following a flow of what had happened, So identifying what is kept as a theme, what is being kept foregrounded and what is kept backgrounded, is something that we have to be sensitive about, And then of course you have your the lesson 6 on conjunctions and logical relations, parataxis, hyponymy, those things, and how they do discourse work, in the text. And now we have, of course, the connection of the genre, discourse, and the style. Again, what are the genres invoked? Ito ba ay, of course, we look at the micro genres, whether they are announcing, whether they are questioning or interrogating, or whether they are making a request or just narrating, ano yung mga grammatical moods, and that's a micro. And then we also have macro genres, wherein of course the larger type of what is being done, like if it's a policy briefing, is it a promotional pitch, is it a scientific report. Again, there are conventions of the event or the actions being done. And then what are the discourses? Again, the ways of representing. So is it marketization, securitization, humanitarianism, or other forms? And then you have to look whether if these are being mixed, whether these are being pitted against, etc. And then we look at styles and identities, whether ano yung persona, again, what is the larger social identity and what is the personal identity, that's the style. So whether that's a managerial, an expert, a populist, and footing and alignment. Again, very important that when you invoke or when you say that this is the type of genre, or this is the type of discourse, or this is the type of style or identity that being used in this particular text, you have to support your research, your claims with a citation or with an evidence that does so. And of course, we also look at discursive practice. No, we look at intertextuality, whether we do using quotes, no, citations, whether they paraphrase or do reported speech, whether it's dialogical or whether it's really just some, or what experts do they choose, what sources do they choose, what sources do they silence, right? Or if they do not silence a particular source that they don't like, do they paraphrase it or do they actually say it, right? So how dialogical are they in a particular text? Next, we also have interdiscursivity. Again, we have to be very sensitive whether or not, of course, there's usually just one more discourse being deployed here because it's either maghahanap yung speaker ng kakampi na discourse, naka-align niya, a discourse probably that is stronger in society and sort of align themselves with that, or a discourse that, many in society sort of doesn't like and sort of separate and other themselves from that, no? So, again, the mixing, the competing discourses, you have to be very sensitive about it. And then, what are the production and consumption routines? No, again, very much related to genres. Like when you say this is a policy brief, who gets to have access to it? Who is the audience? Who is the maker? Right? What is the production? What's the distribution? Or if this is a post, if this is a public post in Facebook, then that's the production consumption route. Then why do you think that is the consumption route? No, if this is a SONA, then why do you think, and what would be the possible influence of that? No, again, you also look at a genre change. Who gets to what other genres do we expect this to sort of be a part of a chain? And so that it can travel, from one audience to another, and its ability to evolve across those genres. So yan. And then also in social practice, again, we look at the discourse and whether or not which of these discourses are seemingly hegemonized, which of those are seemingly are minoritized, and what are dominant, what are resistant, And then we also look at ideology and hegemony, if there is a tendency based on assumption and suppositions that this is naturalized, or these are ideas that are presented as common sense, or are we looking at consequences and contradictions? Who benefits, And we also reflect on that. Who loses, when these particular ideas travel from the text to social reality? What is being legitimized? What is being delegitimized? Linked to social institutions, who gets to uptake this, what happens if this travels in workplaces, in institutions, in families, in schools, in churches, in communities? What can happen if this travels? And then what would be consequences? And we think about this because eventually we have to if we're looking for something problematic, we have to offer an alternative that is more just, that is orientated towards equity, and what is normatively acceptable. So now, how do you identify your topic? Now that you're doing your own CDA for the next how many weeks? So I have included in your assignment packet worksheets, that you can workshop with your partner in order for you to be able to streamline your research problem, so that your research problem is something that can be engaged with using a Faircloughian CDA. So the first worksheet is on this, and so we have research elements that you have to think about, sort of, converse and dialogue with your partner, and the guiding questions that you have to answer in order for you to kind of locate where you are in a particular research element. So these are 6 things that you have to think about when you want to look at a research topic that is both, one, first, important and significant. Number 2, is also something that is feasible, something that is researchable, right? For example, you can think about a particular discourse pero wala naman kayong access to the texts, So it's really important that you think about novelty, significance, and also feasibility on your end. So first is, what event or genre are you trying to look at. So what social event or issue are you studying, like a pandemic, communication, election campaign, influencer marketing? The world is your oyster. But again, look at areas where power asymmetries are found, where there's inequities, where there is possibilities of injustices to happen. Again, we are doing critical work here. So what kinds of text are involved, like policy, a post, a speech, an ad, or a meme? Again, you think about where do we have most resources access to, right? And then you think about what particular discourse or ideology that you want to engage. And again, think about discourses that would most likely be taken for granted, but also deploy some form of power asymmetries in society. So which ism, power relation, or inequality structure does your topic reflect or challenge, like neoliberalism, sexism, technocracy, heterosexism, ableism, ageism, managerialism, right? Toxic positivity, so those types of discourses, right? Or empowerment light, right? So what did you want to look into? And then what style or identity do you want to sort of engage? Do you want it comparative? Like, do you want to look at multiple styles, or are you arguing that there's a particular style or a persona that sort of is best in terms of deploying this power asymmetric related discourse? So who is speaking or represented? What kind of identity is performed? Is it a leader, an expert, a caregiver, an influencer, a citizen, a friend, right? An artist? So again, you have to think about how discourse, event, and style sort of work together in order to legitimize certain discourses that, again, looking at taken for granted power asymmetries in society. And then institutional link, which institution or structures of power shape or benefit from this discourse. So we're looking at themes, right? So again, I want you to think of a little bit more, not too broad, so that your analysis would sort of be fragmented, and also not too specific, that your analysis would be so limited. So you have to look at institutions that sort of give you some ability to explore more, but not have a very fragmented, non-directional analysis na puro umbrella terms na lang yung sagot ninyo. And then very important in your case, because you're sociological students, you have the main arguments of your paper has to be sociological. It has to inherit sociological lineage, right? I know you're just this is your first time being exposed to sociological thinkers, so I am engaging you to read on other sociological thinkers, right? Particularly the more contemporary ones, because the discursive turn usually of sociology happened usually around the contemporary period. So I am engaging you to read more, and of course, what praxis or action? Ano ba yung ideal world na gusto ninyo, or ideal, representation, an ideal action, an ideal identity, that sort of can counteract or sort of flatten those power gaps, power asymmetries, and inequalities, and engage in more just ways of communicating and producing text, and what counter discourses can we sort of offer. And so when you think about a topic, you don't go step by step. You do it iteratively. So you start somewhere here. So maybe you can start with sociological theory, and then other else will follow, and then you go back again to kind of modify each part until you get a sense of coherence and direction in terms of what research you want to do for your paper. Yeah. So for example, if your general topic, this is not yet, of course, the working title, but this is sort of the topic. So again, religious conservatism in public statements on morality and social issues. What I'm saying is that this is not yet working. This is not yet the final title because it's still very broad to us. Like, public statements, religious conservatism, it's still very big, right? Morality and social issues. What issues? Again, so we have to a little bit more, the theme has to be more delimited, right? So it's too big. So what could be possible events or genres that you can look into? So maybe you can look at opinion columns, you can like church press releases, pastoral letters, or probably Facebook posts of pastoral groups. Next, what are the discourse or ideologies? So maybe religious nationalism, family values, moral panic, moral conservatism, right? And then what style of identities? So how do the speakers present themselves? So maybe moral guardians or defenders of the Filipino family, etc. What institutional links are found here? So of course the institution of the speaker and also the different organizations and institutions that they are overlapping with, that they are interacting with. And of course you have sociological theory. Do you want to look at Weber's religious authority and legitimation, or Foucault's pastoral power, or Connell's hegemonic masculinity if you're talking about LGBTQ issues? And then what could be possible avenues for action, and what would you be advocating as a discourse that would sort of flatten the power asymmetries found in that particular. So this is just an example of how you can do your worksheet. So this is something that you have to engage with and converse and debate with your partner. And then it's also important that you are able to articulate good CDA-based research questions. So you have a general statement of the problem, and so we just follow this particular speech act, The study aims to critically examine. And then you have what is sort of already articulate where you're going, who is the speaker or who is the writer, and then what are the different discourses, and objects, and then where you're going to get it from. So you can use this as a specific sample or model, for you to follow. Now, for CDA, I would suggest that there would be 4 objectives or corresponding research questions, and this follows, of course, the paradigm of Fairclough. So we have the descriptive or the textual analysis. So we look at the textual part muna, so how is modality, how is transitivity, lexicalization, what is the composition, is there parataxis, which is foregrounded, may nominalization ba, may passivization ba, etc. So i-describe niyo yung text. What are the common what are the themes in terms of the common textual textures of the text? And then you have the analytical or the discursive practice. So now look at how they interact with the discursive side, and then and then you have a critical or a social practice question, and then you have, of course, very important, hindi matatapos kay Fairclough, yung transformative practice. So you can screenshot this or you can post this for a while so you can see how it's being written here. So una, linguistic features, and dito sa discursive practice, looking at other institutional discourses, so again, discursive practice, and dito naman reproduces and challenges the systems of moral regulation in Philippine society. So again, societal, and this one is propose alternative or inclusive ways. So in short, praxis. So you can screenshot this, read thoroughly, and you can use this for your particular worksheets later. And here are some guidelines for you to have your working title. Again, don't be so obsessed with titles. It can change up until the end, but some of the guidelines of making your title work for you. So you have, these are the guide questions. Does the title name the discourse or phenomenon? Does it indicate the analytic focus? Does it include a sociological dimension? Again, very important kasi sociology tayo. So power, subjectivity, inequality, identity. Again, hindi tayo makukulong sa linguistic features lang because that's linguistics, right? So we have to connect the linguistic features with larger social structures or practices in institutions. Is it context clear but not overly long? Is it within 12 to 15 words or 2 lines? Would someone outside the class roughly know what the paper is about from the title? So sometimes we articulate that it is a critical discourse analysis in the beginning, so para clear na communicate na siya agad. So for example, you have these monikers, but again, these are not yung mga stylized. So okay yan. So at critical discourse analysis of neoliberal subjectivity, so you have your discourse. In hustle cultural post, you know already what text you're going to analyze among Filipino TikTok creators. So this is your identity. And you also have to plan your data gathering. So there are 5 components, for you to think about. So again, this is a worksheet. This is not yet your final paper. This is just a worksheet for you to plan. So, for example, first you have to identify your corpus composition. So, what should you answer? List the number and kinds of text you plan to analyze. Like, are you going to analyze news articles, Facebook posts, pastoral letters, press releases, and indicate why this number is enough for a meaningful CDA within your time frame. So, for example, in this case, 10 Facebook posts from the ABCD pastoral group between 2022 to 2024 focusing on moral and gender topics. So, meron ng inclusion and exclusion criteria. For data type, specify that your corpus will include textual data only. Clarify what kinds of text you will exclude. So, only written posts and captions. No memes, videos, or comments. Bawal ang comments pag private individuals. So, we'll talk about that in the next slides. And then sampling strategy. How do you know that this will be a part of your corpus? Explain how and why you chose your text. Identify your criteria for inclusion. Like, for example, ABCD pastoral groups talking a lot about topics. So, ang focus mo lang is on, let's say, sexuality. So, you look at certain keywords. So, for example, ayan. And then, purposive sampling. Selected posts directly addressing gender, morality, and sexuality from 2022 to 2024. Hindi pa magkapareho. Ayan. So, next. Data management. Describe how you organize and label your data. Indicate where you will store your text, like in a Google Docs or folder. So, all posts saved in one Word document, each labeled text 1 to 10 with date and short summary. And then, what would be your ethical considerations? So, for the ethical considerations, ito ang importante. 1, for our class, you are only allowed to analyze texts already in the public domain. So, ibig sabihin, if you need to enter a password to get into that particular post, then that's not public, right? So what are public? Published news, official policies, public speeches, pwedeng mga post na, kunyari, pagka nag-incognito ka or nag-private viewing ka sa website mo at hindi ka nakapasok sa Facebook mo, at nakikita mo yung post na yon kahit hindi ka nakapasok sa Facebook mo. Right? Ibig sabihin, pwede mo siyang gamitin. Pero if makikita mo lang siya kapag nasa loob ka ng Facebook, hindi pwede. So, yun na. It has to be public. Next, no recruitment. Bawal mag-recruit. No intervention and no deception. So, in short, you will not communicate with anyone involved. But, you can only look at for example, this is the post. You cannot look at the comments. Those comments are individual private persons. Right? So, just in case that's what you're going to look at. Assuming that you're going to look at like social media posts. But social media is not the only sources of text. You can look at, again, like I said, policies, posters, basta text lang. Yan. Do not record names, handles for private individuals, quote public officials, and institutions only. So, ibig sabihin, you also have to look at it. Report patterns, themes, not individuals. Use short, non-searchable quotes for paraphrases needed to avoid doxing or non-traceable quoting. You don't need this because I'm not allowing you to have in private individuals. But if you will not be using if you will be allowed in the future to use private individuals commenting, then you cannot paste comment, and you cannot use their actual comments and toto into your paper because they can be doxed. So hindi pwede. Again, we're talking again with social media because I am pretty sure that some of you might be, rushing through social media to get your corpus. So no comments allowed. So any private individual, basta galing sa private individual yung text, cannot be. Okay? So how many? Ilan ba dapat? So you can use one text if it's a long master test like a SONA, a landmark policy, or like an encyclical. Kaso medyo mabigat ito, kapag ganyan. And you'll be held to a higher standards, So, or you can do 3 to 5 or more text single for a single actor CDA, like one influencer, for instance, or more if short posts. 6 to 10 tests, best if you wanna compare these courses, like, if that's your goal, Although I would suggest you just do one single actor. 15 texts if you're doing lighter coding, or if you move towards corpus-assisted quantitative CDA, which again, we're not going to do. But the goal is for us to be able to achieve information sufficiency or evidence of saturation. Ibig sabihin, kapag wala nang bagong lumalabas, then we stop. In my rule of thumb in our class maybe is based on the length, but I would appreciate if you do like around 6 to 10 would be something, especially if you're doing social media. But if it's long, then 3 to 5 is good. Okay? So, we will be having a sort of mini defense on this, and I'll be giving more information on this and more suggestions to you as we go along when you're doing your actual work na. Sorry, na-catch yung ating ethical considerations. So, continuing. So, exclude private, paywall, or access restricting material. So, I said that already. Do not process special category data like about minors. So, kahit public yan, pag minors, hindi pwede. Criminal records, hindi pwede. So, health. So, yung mga probably wag muna natin galawin yung EMAN posts because that is quite sensitive. So, maybe no. So respect the audience context and the text was actually produced for. Like, treat public as contextually public, not, you don't carte blanche it, na hindi siya as a whole. Following terms of service and robots, no scrape directives. Wala naman sa inyo marunong siguro mag-scraping, so but I do not allow scraping. Code within fair dealing, fair use prefers link citations over extensive reproduction. Like, for example, instead of like putting the whole text there, you just lead them to the link. Again, if it's public. So this would be one way of articulating your ethical consideration. This project analyzes publicly available texts like policy documents, news, official speeches, involves no interaction or intervention, collects no direct identifiers or private individuals, reports only aggregated patterns with non-traceable excerpts, uses secure minimal data, and therefore poses no more than minimal risk. And meets criteria for exemption for ethical review. Kasi yun ang goal natin. We don't want to have ethical review, so that's why because we can really do critical discourse analysis of the comments, but we have to go through rigorous ethical review, which again, we don't have time for. Kaya public domain lang tayo. And so we have here the different CDA dimensions. I just want you to screenshot it. I will not be explaining this one by one, but again, because this is already what we have already covered in the different chapters already. So these are just the strategies, and you can screenshot this and you can use this in terms of looking at, when you're now it's time for you to analyze the data. But basically, I would like you to sort of focus your analysis. Hindi dapat sabog, right? So when you analyze, you have to analyze per CDA dimensions of event, discourses, no, representation of actors and style, which again is very much correlated with discourses and style. And then style is related with modality and also the evaluation. So this we discussed this already. When you look at the back of, or the latter part of Fairclough's book on 2003, these are some of the guide questions, no, that you look at, no. These are the guide questions, no. So these are the things that you ask yourself as you read each unit of corpus that you have, right? And that you have to annotate your analysis. Speaking of annotation, you have to create what we call an audit trail. An audit trail is a practice that we use in qualitative research, wherein we have to document all of our analytic processes from the most raw to the intermediate to the final analytic outcomes. Kailangan, if I am a reader, no, or I'm an evaluator of research, I am able to trace how your findings, for example, your theme is reproducing, let's say, conservatism. It really is coming from a safe, sane way of analyzing that is adherent to the rules, that is ethical, and adherent also to the actual truth that is found in the text. No? So this is very much important in all types of qualitative research to ensure rigor. So how do we do that for our class here in CDA? So we have different parts. So the first part of the audit trails is just, the documentation of your research design. So I just want you to sort of put this into a table, no, so that do this for you. Hindi pa naman to kasama sa inyong output for the next week, no, but this is something that you have to do. So this is just documentation of the research design. So introduction to. By the way, audit trails are found in the appendix. Next, we have data collection record. So for the data collection record, right? For each data set that you have to have the verbatim transcription, and for each verbatim transcription, it should have a text ID or a unique code for each text. Where did you obtain it? Kung nyari URL, no, if it's not a URL, if it's a printed copy, where did you get it? Where did you access it? For traceability, anong date mo siya kinuha? What's the genre? And some notes. Bakit mo siya in-include? So, for example, you have 10. I expect you to have 10 like this kasama yung verbatim transcription. Number 3, once you have your verbatim transcription, I want to see how you annotated them and how you're able to answer all of the analytic questions here. So, you have to annotate it there. So, it's either you print it out and you write it there, or you use Google Forms, Google Docs, and you have comments. So you have to look at all of these levels. No, how did you annotate them? So this is not what you're going to show me. You're going to show me this. Ito. This is just a guide for you, or probably show. No, so how can you be able to record? So maybe you can have notes in the margins. You put comment tags in Google Docs, you highlight, no? So I just know that you are really able to fully immerse yourself into the texts that you're analyzing, but it has to be annotated, and the copies of the annotations must be included in the audit trails, which is included in the appendix of your work. Next is number 4, analytic memos, no? So each memo captures the reasoning process behind the interpretation. This should include text, discourse, power, society. So there are 4 types of memo. You have the descriptive memo. What did you see? Interpretive memo. What could they mean? Linking memo. How are they related to sociological theory? No, and reflexive memo. How did you feel about what you found out? No? So, yon. So, each student will have to have a memo, narrative, no, doing descriptive memo, interpretive memo, linking memo, and reflexive memo. So, minimum 2 to 3 short memos per text plus 1 integrated memo per theme. Kung ano yung thematic findings ninyo. Next, we have coding, summary table. No? So, for example, this is your finding, your theme. Ano yung linguistic markers niya? ano yung underlying assumptions, and what are the sociological insights, so that we just know what, how they are connected to each other. So again, this is part of the audit risk. Could be again also put in the actual findings, but this is just us tracking how we analyzed from step 1 to step infinity. Okay? Next, you also have your theoretical integration log, which is also very much related to your memos, but how do you now connect your text to the discourse to social practice, and practice to structure, right? And how is it yung critical reflection ninyo, So it's also very much able to conduct that. So ang importante dito, what is important here is that when you're able to write this, it's going to be easier for you to write the reported results later. Again, this is not yet your findings. These are just the documents that you have to review to create, so that you are documenting your mental processes as you are doing your CDA. Again, so isipin niyo na you're thinking about how you got from point A to point B. It has to be documented, so that I have an appreciation of the mental processes, the cognitive processes, the reflective processes that you did, for you to be able to come up with the findings. And then, how do we now write the CDA research? My suggestion is you do not write anything in the report first until you're finished with the analysis, right? So, by the way, I'll just very, very quickly skim this, because I am going to provide you a actual document, that has this inputs already, and already is APA format, so you can just, download the template and write, in there. So, if we are having 4,000 words, 4K words, not including the citations, and the references, and the abstract, and the tables, right? So this is just the block of text, the main text, right? So these are different parts, particularly for our CDA research. You have your introduction, which should have the following: background of the study, that situates the issue socially and historically. Answer the question: what event, issue, or discourse is being studied? What social structures and historical process produce it? Again, you have to make sure that you are contributing to sociological research, and so you also have to reflect sociology in your articulations. And then you have the statement of the problem, and the research objectives, and the significance. So these are and then you also have theoretical framework. Again, you have to articulate sociological theories, but of course your main theoretical anchor is really Fairclough's dimensions, right, of text, theory, text, discourse, and social practice, and then of course, the connecting of genre, discourse, and the other one, identity. And how is it relevant to CDA? And we have a conceptual framework or diagram. The conceptual framework or diagram must follow this. So, ganyan. Kasi dapat CDA. So, what are the textual features you want to analyze? What are the discourse practices that you're analyzing? And what are the social practices? And yung connections nila must be articulated or must be supported by sociological theory. So, this is what we expect. Again, this is also part of the worksheet. So, you can already sort of work into that. Alright. Sige. Next, we have methodology. What would be your research design? So, again, ang research design nating lahat ay qualitative critical discourse analysis using dialectical relational approach of Fairclough. Right? And then, of course, after you have decided on the corpus selection, you have to now say it narratively. And what's your analytical framework? So, yun din sa methodology. Next, we have findings for your textual analysis. So again, what are your findings for linguistic discursive patterns, vocabularies, metaphors, collocations, voice, modalities, sentence relations, representations, and value-laden terms? Next is interpretation under the discursive practice, asan yung intertextuality, interdiscursivity, institutional embedding, and discursive strategies. And finally, you have your critique. So what are those hegemonic ideologies, no, that sustain these power asymmetries? And of course, very important, what do you suggest for emancipatory mechanisms, no, to sort of fight back against those power asymmetries? And then, of course, you have your conclusions, you have your summary, you have your practical and theoretical implications. Again, theoretical implications on sociology. And then what would be further sociological research that can be done? Could be CDA still, but other. So now that you've known that this is how the text reproduces things, what are other future research that can be done, whether that's in the method of CDA or not? So these are the things that we were able to discuss for this particular video lecture. You can screenshot. If there are things that are still unclear yet, you can go back to the video lecture, scrub back. So thank you so much for listening, and it was a pleasure teaching creating all of these videos. I hope that you learned, but of course there are still things to do and more CDA to write, and hopefully you were able to glean a more critical view about the texts that you engage with every day, that they're not necessarily value-free or neutral, and that there are different ways of doing, there are different ways of representing, and there are different ways of being that influences the way our society works. And the texts are powerful. They are not just influenced by society, but they also influence society. And I hope that as you go along with your college learning, your college education, you become more critical of the texts that you engage with in every day, and hope that this inspires you to do more critical research in the future.